context of some of the things that I want to talk about, and Robert Bernal has in fact covered a number of these points very eloquently. But perhaps let me begin by offering some historical perspective. If we go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, then the public sector was doing extremely well. And by the 1970s in particular, the private sector was struggling. People wondered about the future of private colleges in particular. And in 1978, 1980, no one could envision a scenario in which the private sector would once again prosper. Today, no one can imagine a scenario in which the pendulum will swing back in the other direction toward a happy, healthy, prosperous public sector. So, and I certainly don't have such a scenario to offer. But things do change over time, and but the problems facing us, as Robert Bernal has explained, are certainly daunting. The private sector has flourished in the last 30 years, largely due to conditions that have allowed them to raise tuition. And those conditions are explained. This was made possible by using federal student loans and tuition discounts to capture what economists call consumer surplus. And in private universities, rising revenues from student tuition were largely matched by increased spending. Students paid more, but presumably they got more too. This was not the case in public universities. Student tuition revenues rose at a similar rate, and lately even more, but spending rose far less. Student dollars have replaced state dollars for perhaps 1/4 of total education costs. This is one aspect of the privatization of higher education, which is the context for the last 30 years. State appropriations for public colleges and universities per student in constant dollars peaked in 1977. This figure has fluctuated since then, but today it's probably 20% below that figure. What is responsible for this fiscal neglect? Much has been written about it, and certainly Medicaid has made a dent in state expendieffectures. But recent research has found that voter preferences might have some influence on the levels of tax revenues or fiscal effort, but they seem to have no influence on state budgetary allocations. Internal politics predominate for determining who gets what in state budgets. Now, policy analysts also seem to agree that one reason higher education suffers in these budgetary trade-offs is the belief that universities can find other sources of funds, particularly by raising tuition. Whereas once state legislatures sought to keep public tuition affordable, they now rely instead on mostly federal student financial aid. This is one situation where states are able to transfer costs to the federal government. And of course, everybody favors student financial aid, right? Well, there's a downside here too. The federal government cannot be accused of neglecting higher education. From 2000 to 2009, although there may not have been as much academic research money as we would like, federal support for academic research nearly doubled, increasing by $15 billion. Federal student aid expenditures rose by 133%, adding $65 billion. Federal student loans now exceed all state appropriations to public higher education. And total federal student aid roughly equals all the tuition revenues of colleges and universities in all sectors. The viability of colleges and universities and our salaries now depend on this source of funds. However, no one ever planned to finance American higher education this way. Yet, we keep on hurtling down this road with little thought to the consequences. This loan culture, in particular, has underwritten the exorbitant tuitions at selected private colleges and universities. The nonprofit sector as a whole enrolls just over 20% of students and accounts for 30% of subsidized Stafford loans. A more perverse situation exists among the for-profit institutions, the fastest growing sector of American higher education. That sector now enrolls over 8% of students and accounts for 25% of Stafford loans and 24% of Pell Grants. The entire sector is predicated on these revenues. 98% of students receive some form of aid. Every increase in the availability of federal aid fattens the profit margins of these corporations, allowing them to open more campuses and to offer more degree programs. Federal student aid thus finances a growing competitor to public higher education, and one that is peddling an inferior product. Yet we are stuck in pretty much in a situation where we count on rising public tuitions supported by student aid in order to finance public institutions. But that whole system of high tuition, high aid really works more to the advantage of the private sector. For undergraduate education, the era of privatization has produced a growing bifurcation of U.S. higher education. American higher education has always formed an institutional hierarchy, but this now looks more like a bimodal distribution. On one side are the non-selective institutions of the open sector. They're heavily vocational, have lower costs, and fewer educational resources. A large number of their students come from middle and lower middle class, struggle financially with loans and jobs, and often attend part-time. And their likelihood of obtaining a bachelor's degree in 6 years is less than 50%. On the other side is the selective sector, where institutions compete with one another to offer high-quality, high-cost education to the most talented students that they can attract. Now, the problem that Robert Berdahl alluded to of the lack of educational attainment in the United States largely concerns the open sector, and it largely concerns the public institutions in that open sector, which educate about 2/3 of American undergraduates. And the basic factors I think were alluded to.